Back home, the band had more time off. Even though we hadn't toured in the States for a full year, we figured we'd make another record first. We decided to work with Bob Ezrin again, the producer who had served as our captain in Svengali for Destroyer. That was it. We would make another Destroyer. The problem was that the stuff we were writing was no better than the songs on Unmasked. In fact, it was probably worse. We'd lost the plot. My songs were nothing to write home about. Gene's were no better. But then Bob entered the picture, and he floated the idea of a concept album, which really came out of left field. Gene quickly bought into it and came up with a generic, vague, typical concept. It was about a kid who was the chosen one. Bill got behind the idea, too. It would be our attempt to woo the critics.
Kiss album. Music from the Elder. World without heroes. The legend of the Elder. Conceived, written, and performed by Kiss on Casablanca Records. The new Kiss album. Music from the Elder.
Let's put out an album that makes a statement, he told us. One that shows everybody how talented you are. Trying to show people how talented and bright you are is the best way to make an idiot of yourself, and we ended up doing that with flying colors. Looking back, we wanted peer acceptance and critical approval and lost sight of the fact that none of that had mattered to us in the beginning. The people who so vehemently disliked us were more tied up in their own issues than in what kind of music we were making. The fact that the dislike and distaste was so pronounced, almost obsessive, throughout our career should have been a clue that it had little to do with us. If people wanted to waste their time wringing their hands over how much they hated my band, that was pathetic. What may have been more pathetic was that we tried to overcome it by pandering to those people. But we were clueless and decided to try to elevate ourselves, to separate ourselves from where we had started. We assured ourselves that we would impress a lot of people. Finally, we would make an album that garnered critical acclaim, our masterpiece. Gene, Eric, and I moved to Toronto in March 1981 to work on the album. Bob wanted to do it on his home turf. We didn't know at first, but his drug habit was now dictating his choice of location. Ace didn't even travel to Toronto. It's all well and good for him to say in retrospect that he didn't like the musical direction the band was taking, but the fact is that even if we had been doing exactly what he wanted to do musically, he was too wasted to play. He didn't need an excuse to drink. He was a drunk. He was bombed all the time. As work trudged on, Bob's substance problems became so acute he didn't show up either. I had always been aware that Bob had a drug problem, but he had managed it in the past. Now his 24/7 cocaine use had taken on epic proportions. The captain abandoned ship. He was supposed to serve as the visionary behind the concept, and all we were getting were notes sent to the studio by messenger after Bob listened to cassettes we sent to his home. Eventually, we got so far behind in the production that Gene and I started working simultaneously in 2 separate studios, both of us sending tapes to Bob and getting back notes, doing the whole thing piecemeal. We had virtually no idea what the other guy was doing, and we couldn't reach Bob on the phone. His wife relayed messages because Bob was too fucked up to get to the phone.
Kiss was about to enter the studio to record a kind of record we had never done before, a concept album called The Elder. While Eric was such a positive force, Ace was going deeper and deeper into seclusion. Although he liked Eric very much, he couldn't really hang out with him because Eric wouldn't get high. So, more and more, Ace went off to Las Vegas with his friends and gambled and drank and drove his fast cars too fast. We decided we needed Bob Ezrin back in our lives because he was the guy who had delivered Destroyer, probably our best studio album. We contacted him, and he decided he wanted to work on a new record with us. Bob decided we should move up to Toronto and cut the record there. We started rehearsing in Ace's home studio in Connecticut, But almost immediately there were problems. The first being that Ace had no intention of leaving Connecticut for Toronto. Also, Ezrin made it clear to Ace that his material was not going to wind up on the album, or at least not very much of it, because it wasn't impressing him. And Bob himself was having some substance problems. It was a very unhealthy situation for all of us. And it was unfortunate because this was the first record that Eric Carr was going to play on. Initially, at least, the material for this new album, which ended up being called The Elder, was promising. Eric showed us that he was leagues beyond Peter by teaching himself how to play guitar and co-writing a song I helped him with called Under the Rose.
Though you may be pure of heart and free of sin, and though you have been chosen to begin, and yet you must be worthy of the prophecy. But seek and you shall find your destiny. Loneliness will haunt you. Will you sacrifice? Do you take me home? Will you live your life under the
He became a real contributing member of the band, even to the point of dealing with the facts of Kiss life. For example, I had written a song called I, one of whose lines was, "I don't need to get wasted, it only holds me down, 'cause I got a will of my own and the guts to stand alone." The chorus went, "Because I believe in me." That had always been my philosophy. So I decided to write a song about it. I was excited about recording I, but Ezrin didn't feel that Eric's drumming was cutting it on that song, and he brought in a session player. With Peter, that would have resulted in major trauma. Eric, though he wasn't happy about it, dealt with it.
Poor Eric, this wonderful guy who thought he had joined a hard rock band, was suddenly playing gibberish with a fox costume in his closet. He was completely thrown by this band that had lost its way and was stumbling along a ridiculous path. He wasn't comfortable making explicit objections at that point, but he did express bewilderment and discomfort. "You know, this isn't what I was expecting," he said. But he was never in a position to draw a line in the sand. He must have had serious doubts, though. He kept playing us a new band called Metallica. He was into stuff like speed metal and thrash way before we were. The songs we recorded had no teeth. We were gumming the music at that point. We had forsaken everything we loved and embraced. We were intoxicated with fame and success. We were no longer the band everyone loved, and clearly we didn't love that band anymore either. How else to explain the way we veered away from what we did? For a band like ours to be doing something like Music from the Elder truly reeked of the little Stonehenge coming down on the stage during This' Spinal Tap. If only we had realized. For the cover, we intended to use my hand instead of a model's hand. But the day before the photo shoot, I slammed my finger in a window and had a purple nail that had to be retouched. This should have been an omen. When we were finally finished in September, we went back to New York. If I played the tape for anyone at my apartment, I insisted on silence, as if I was exposing them to brilliance and they had to sit through the entire thing straight through. We also had a listening party for the record company with the same insistence that they listen to it in a manner befitting its artistic merit. The reaction at the end of the listening session was like the audience when they heard Springtime for Hitler from the producers. Mouths wide open. I already knew somehow that it wasn't because the sheer greatness of the album had taken their breath away. The record label hated the album. It was originally sequenced in a way that vaguely told a story. But that meant you didn't get to anything that resembled a rock song for quite a while. So they made us change the order. As if it wasn't already bad enough, they basically did the equivalent of tearing all the pages out of a book, throwing them up in the air, and then binding them back together again. In preparation for the launch, we also changed our image to accommodate how we now chose to look offstage. We didn't want to have long hair anymore. I had razor-cut hair, a bandana around my head, I still needed to hide my ear, and a necklace that looked like I got it from Chiquita Banana. Gene had a little braided ponytail hanging over his shoulder. Ace was still in the photos even though he had in essence left the band. We were delusional. We had drunk the poisoned Kool-Aid, so to speak. I went into a record store down on 8th Street in the Village the day the album came out in November 1981 and saw a poster for it. I had a panic attack. I looked at the poster and it hit me like a sledgehammer. What the hell have we done?
From a far-off galaxy, I hear you calling me. We are on an odyssey through the realms of time and space, in that enchanted place. You and I come face to face. Once upon not yet.
For the first time in the history of the band, we didn't do a tour following the release of the album. In fact, 2 full years would pass between the end of the 1980 Australian tour and the next time we played live in late December 1982. I grew a beard. I spent the bulk of my time one-on-one with a number of women, either ones I knew around New York or ones I flew in from elsewhere. I didn't attend big social events. I just laid low in a series of relationships with multiple women. A swimsuit model I was seeing at the time said to me, "You'll never be happy because you're so tough on people and so judgmental." She was right. At the time, I didn't realize just how right. That was how I functioned, how I controlled the world around me. Everything had its place. I controlled my environment, but I didn't really live in it. Now, I'm not crying in my beer because hanging around with beautiful women was like spending my days and nights at Disneyland, no matter what my motivation was. And it certainly beat the alternative way people dealt with similar feelings of emptiness.
There's a child in a sundress looking at a rainy sky. There's a place in a desert where an ocean once danced by. There's a song in the silence, weaving in and out of time. We are notes in the music, searching for remembered rhyme.
The allure of buying fancy things was wearing off. I realized while the band was idle that it wasn't about what I could buy with the money. It was about what I didn't have to do. Simply put, money gives you the ability to stop worrying about money. It provides a level of freedom, but it doesn't change you. At the end of the day, you're still the same good guy or the same prick you've always been. Or in my case, the same scared little kid.
On a mountain high somewhere, where only heroes dare, stand the stallion and the bear. We have been and we shall be each other's destiny, one another's odyssey. Once upon not yet, only though someday, countless times we've met along the way.
The Elder came at a strange time in the band's history. For starters, we were no longer with Casablanca Records. Neil Bogart had been bought out by Polygram, and we went from recording for a label where we had a personal relationship with the president to recording for a large entity called Polygram with an enormous staff. We felt lost. Also, I was starting to knock on Hollywood's doors whenever I was in California. I had some ideas for movies and television shows. One was about a black cowboy called Gabriel who lived just before the Civil War. From those initial meetings in Hollywood, I came up with the idea for The Elder. I wasn't sure whether it would be a record or a movie. All I knew at first was a line that stuck in my head. When the earth was young, they were already old. I conceived of a race of immortal beings, energy-based beings, a takeoff of Marvel's Watcher. These beings were more observers than participants. They didn't interfere with human choice, and as a result, people were ultimately responsible for their own deeds, good and bad. The more I worked on it, the more I thought this would be a strong movie pitch. When Bob Ezrin read my short story, he said, "Well, this is great. We should do a concept record about your short story." Ezrin made this announcement to the band and said we were going to try to make all of our songs fit around this one central idea. We put all the songs in the pot and got busy rewriting some lyrics, and soon enough, we had a rough storyline. The work went quickly because we knew what we wanted, our own Tommy.
Only you know the secrets, but the truth lies deep in your mind. Only you are the answer. You turn the night into day. Yeah. Only you are the man-child. You are the light, and you are the way.
This was a First Kiss project where someone, in this case Bob Ezrin, talked the band members into the notion that credibility and respect from critics are as important as the love of the fans. As a result, it was a very serious record for us. It was a bit surprising for Eric, I'm sure. When he first joined, the band was expecting to do a straight rock and roll record, so he was a little caught off guard. He was not necessarily a big fan of the idea. Also, as much as Paul and I trusted Bob's instincts and supported his idea, Ace opposed it. He was completely against it, to the point that he refused to show up yet again. He wouldn't go up to Toronto and said he would phone in his solo. As it turned out, whenever Ace appears on that record, it's as a result of that process. Copies of the 24-track masters were flown to his home studio in Connecticut from Toronto. At home, he put down a number of different solos, and then it was up to Bob, when it was flown back to Toronto, to figure out which solos to use, or whether, as happened in some cases, another guitar player should be brought in. A number of other guitar players played because Ace just didn't show up.
I never said I was more than I am. Do what I want, I don't give a damn. You're all so weak, you know it makes me ill. Don't like you now, it probably never will. You cheat in life and wonder why you can't sleep at night. You're not well, oh Mr. Blackwell, and we can tell. You're not well, oh Mr. Blackwell, why don't you go ahead?
Unfortunately, all the work that went into The Elder seemed to be for nothing. We had a record that, for the first time, bombed so badly it didn't even go gold. We truly were at a crossroads. We had cut our hair, though we still wore makeup. We had a new member in the band, Eric, and we were trying to figure out what to do in the wake of The Elder's disappointing performance. We were not going to tour with a record that didn't sell. So we turned our attention to television and videos. We shot A World Without Heroes, which was co-written by myself, Lou Reed, Paul, and Bob Ezrin, and would later be covered on one of Cher's records.
A world without heroes is like a world without sun. You can't look up to anyone without heroes. And a world without heroes is like a never-ending race. It's like a time without a place, a pointless thing devoid of grace, where you don't know what you're after, or if something's after you, and you don't know why you don't know a world without heroes.
We also shot a video of I, which would have the dubious distinction of charting in the top 10 only in Italy. We did a whirlwind promo tour of Europe and made television appearances. We then went to Mexico City, where Kiss was huge. On the way into the city, the limo was playing one of 4 different radio stations that had Kiss radio programs. Programs that did nothing but play Kiss songs and interviews for 4 hours. At the Mexico City Hotel, we were feted by the Mexican record company. We were given gold record awards and hosted the press in full Kiss makeup. Ace took the opportunity to piss into a large bottle and put it next to the other bottles of champagne. But though it was a funny moment, it signaled what was about to happen.
From the Los Angeles Basin, it's Friday! With a special appearance by Kiss!
when we returned to America, Ace wouldn't return phone calls. We had arranged to be on the Eurovision television show, shown throughout Europe to millions of people. Here was an opportunity to reach a lot of people and perhaps resurrect a dying record. We scheduled a live broadcast feed of us lip-syncing to I from the stage of Studio 54 in New York. When the clock hit 10, we would be on, live. Ace never showed up. We sent limos and George Sewitt, our security guard, to Ace's home. But on returning, he said Ace was close to comatose. The show had to go on. We performed without Ace, and for the first time and last time, as a trio.
The rock group KISS, a very imaginative one, minus guitarist Ace Frehley, who was down with the flu, was the star attraction of Italy's San Remo Music Festival last night on stage in New York. Now, if that seems a little confusing to you, Robin Leach explains things.
A typical evening at Studio 54? Not exactly. The rock group KISS paid an early visit to the New York discotheque to be honored by Italy's San Remo Music Festival as the most important international music stars of the year. And to show their appreciation, KISS performed live via satellite, a first for the festival since it began 32 years ago. It's taken more than a week of preparation and 3 days of wiring for what winds up as just 8 minutes of television. What you're seeing and hearing now is being seen and heard live all over Europe.
We're really lucky in that our fans are so dedicated that they'll turn up for something like this, which is basically lip-syncing one song.
I think they're different than a lot of other rock and roll bands, fans, in that they really get into it. It's not just a matter of coming to a rock and roll show and sitting back, and they really feel it. You know, I mean, one word from us and they'll go into...
Now it's time for my exclusive interview with KISS. You know, when KISS first formed back in 1972, their music was ridiculed by the press. They were seen as a gimmick, just a band that wore a lot of makeup. But the fans stuck by KISS, and the band went on to prove the critics wrong. Their songs have hit the top 40 8 times, and their albums, consistent million sellers. Recently, with the departure of Peter Criss, one of the band's founding members, KISS has gone through their very first personnel crisis. We asked them what problems they ran into finding a drummer to replace Peter Criss.
When you've been together as long as we have, if a member leaves, that's not enough reason for the band to quit. You know, you got to pick up the slack. You have somebody else come in, add a new dimension. It was a little tough because we didn't want to use anybody that was known. And there was a lot of people from other groups that wanted to try out, but we really wanted to find somebody who was unknown because we've tried to keep a certain amount of anonymity.
We asked them if after 9 years they considered performing without their makeup.
I think if we took the makeup off, I mean, it's certainly possible to perform without the makeup, but I think it would be a different band. That doesn't mean the band would end. It would just...
Like the worm to a butterfly, we should simply change form and go on endlessly through the Milky Way.
Emote. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You just change.
Yes, KISS has gone through a lot of changes lately, including a change in their musical style. Their latest album is a concept LP called Songs from the Elder. It's an album about modern mythology and the need for heroes.
Well, this album is a group of songs that are taken from the story of the Elder, and they're telling part of the story.
And the story is about a boy.
About a boy, a very special boy.
Very special boy.
Well, we've got a single out, Casey, called World Without Heroes, that we think is a very beautiful song.
Has an excellent vocal on it.
And we all wrote it. Paul wrote it.
Ray at the end. He cries on the videotape.
It's a...
Just like the Indian about the car.
It's a really touching moment.
Oh, if something's up to you and you don't know why, you don't know.
After Unmasked, the guys decided to take some time off. There was a lot of emotions between Peter leaving and doing the next record or not, and when and so forth. We knew that the record company needed another record, but no one was in the mood to either write one and or record one. As the pressure came down on us to come up with a new album, and I realized the guys weren't writing, or did they feel like recording a new album? And I thought the only person that I knew that knew them well enough and could get us through this was Bob Ezrin, incredibly bright producer who was capable of helping them write as well as producing the album. Well, when we started to think about doing another Kiss album, no one was very much into it, and we came up with an idea, hopefully that would help us and would get us through this problem. And the idea was to do a concept album. That concept album turned out to be The Elder. Now, The Elder was done helter-skelter. It was really a rough one to do. It was not easy in any respects. The songs were hard to write. No one was in the mood to do it. Bob was frustrated by it. Both Gene and Paul were. Ace really didn't want to do it, and he didn't want to work with Bob. He had an argument over something that had happened in the Destroyer album, so Bob was not his favorite producer at that point. And we started off with the album and dragged ourselves through it, and we finally finished it. And I must say that it's certainly a unique album, but most people don't consider it a Kiss album. We delivered it to the record label, and the record label hated it. In fact, when we first played it for them, they just said, look, why don't we can this album and do another album? Well, the thought of that was definitely not going to happen. It was hard enough just to get this album done. And that was really kind of the beginning of the end, both with me and Kiss, and for a number of things. They had decided that they wanted to take off their makeup. I was certainly against that. I thought that we had spent too much time protecting their makeup legally and through the Library of Congress, which was the first time any rock and roll act had ever been copywritten. Their faces were copywritten in the Library of Congress. It took us years to do that. So when they decided they wanted to take off their makeup and they weren't happy with The Elder, no one was happy with it at that time. So we had a couple of meetings about whether we were going to stay together or not. And finally one day, Gene and Paul walked into my office and said, well, Bill, I think the time has come. And we had talked about everything and how we began. And we wound up actually with tears in our eyes at the end, but we decided to part, that it was the time. They needed to go on and do what they wanted to do, and I needed to do what I had to do.